Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the news brief. Today, we're going to be talking about what seems like Trump waking up this morning and deciding to completely shift course on weapon supplies to Ukraine, on his opinion about Ukraine. Who knows? But, anyways, then we'll discuss it together in the comments because I don't want to suffer alone, and you shouldn't have to either. So please leave your questions, suggestions, and constructive criticism down below. I read all of it. I appreciate this back and forth communication. Let's go. So apparently, in the July 4th phone call that Zelenskyy had with President Trump, Trump told him that he's not responsible for the weapons halt to Ukraine. And that was reported by the Wall Street Journal. Interestingly enough, obviously, before when Trump was asked by the media as to what happened and why they're halting weapons to Ukraine, Trump cited the same thing as Pete Hegseth said, which is, we need to prioritize what the US needs and we don't have enough. And that's why at last minute, they intercepted very, very important air defense systems right ahead of Russia's incredibly incessant strikes on Ukraine. Pete Hegseth said that, the United States is at a critical low, at a critical minimum, and the U.S. needs these weapons themselves, and they just can't send them to Ukraine because there needs to be a Pentagon review. It later came out through an article also in the Wall Street Journal and subsequently other reputable publications that actually this was done without the consent of the White House. This was done without the consent of Senate. This was done without the consent of anyone really, and the Pentagon officials as well. It was Pete Hegseth's idea. Then there were reports that came out that quite literally the United States is not at a critical low, that they have plenty of time to prepare for any potential conflict if they start manufacturing weapons now, which will also create jobs for Americans. But anyways, they're not even anywhere near the critical low, and if they want it to be at a higher number, they have all the time, ability, and supplies in the world. And right now, there are plenty of weapons that can make it to Ukraine. A lot of senators were outraged. Actually, a lot of advisors were outraged, and everyone was saying that Ukraine should be getting these weapons. What specifically is responsible for Trump's changing rhetoric? We don't know. However, Pete Hegseth is under serious scrutiny about all of the chaos that he has been unleashing in the Pentagon. And the fact that he has been saying that the Pentagon needs to be restructured and all these new measures need to be implemented, the fact that he has been doing these random checkups, the fact that he's basically ruling it kind of like a dictatorship at the helm of someone who doesn't know what they're doing. He's been under a lot of scrutiny, and I think that this past weapons mishap is what brought him under even more scrutiny because we have been seeing a lot of publications worldwide, even those that are quite radically right, criticize him, criticize his approach, and criticize his actions. And some publications posted headlines such as, "What will it take to remove Pete Hegseth?" or "How to remove Pete Hegseth." So everyone is quite outraged with him. Anyways, whether it was because of Pete Hegseth or maybe Mark Rutte, who was gearing up to talk to Trump about not forcing Ukraine to surrender or give in to Russia in a very unfavorable deal, we don't know what, but Trump woke up and decided that his rhetoric about Ukraine is going to completely turn absolutely 180. Honestly, maybe it's 360 at this point because it just started from scratch. It did a full round, full circle and started from scratch because here's what we are hearing from Trump today. First of all, and most shockingly, he said we're going to give Ukraine as many weapons as we can afford. Now, Ukrainian media translated that as many weapons as we can afford in a sense of oh, probably not a lot. However, in American English, as many weapons as we can afford means, in layman's terms, a truckload, as in a lot of weapons, as many as we can afford. I'll buy as many bags as I can afford, as in I will spend all of the money I have on bags, or I will spend all of the money I have on weapons. So that's a huge shift in rhetoric. Not only that, he said a lot more things, but before we get to those, there is also an update on sanctions. Apparently, the EU is working with the US Senate to impose some of the toughest sanctions on Russia that have been seen to date. Again, it feels like one day Trump just woke up and, as we joke on the internet, chose violence. Because genuinely, everything that has been stalled to this day, at least from this man's mouth, which Again, I, I will believe it when it happens. But even so, his rhetoric has always been kind of flip floppy, and he hasn't been making any radical statements on Ukraine and has refrained from really saying anything like, oh, and has really refrained from condemning the deaths that are happening in Ukraine due to Russia. And his rhetoric was always very mild in support of Ukraine and very strong in support of Putin. Anyways, so that changed. And now his rhetoric is as follows. The US is going to send additional defensive weapons to Ukraine at Trump's direction. He said, at President Trump's direction, the Department of Defense is sending additional defensive weapons to Ukraine so that the Ukrainian people can defend themselves. While we work to secure a lasting peace and end the killing, said Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell. He added that the U.S. system for assessing military supplies globally remains in place and continues to be a key component of national defense priorities, meaning that, there are lots of weapons that can be taken from various different stations in Europe and worldwide, and that Ukraine can be getting these weapons as early as next week or in 2 weeks. Trump personally said they have to be able to defend themselves. He confirmed weapons shipments once again and criticized Putin, which is a first. The United States will send more weapons to Ukraine amid intensified Russian strikes, U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters on July 7th, adding that he's disappointed in Russian President Vladimir Putin. And the rhetoric that he was using in his statement was that they're being bombarded a lot. There are lots of deaths. They really need weapons to defend themselves. Albeit the first weapons shipments in a week or two are going to be defensive. They're also going to work to give Ukraine as many weapons as they can afford, and they're also going to be offensive weapons. And I understand that a lot of us don't trust Trump, myself included, because I can never, I can never really um he says one thing, he does another thing. He very often changes his mind and stuff like that. But this is the first time that his rhetoric actually seemed strong. And here's the thing: Trump is not the kind of person who, my dad called me this morning, and he was like, "Yulia, I've seen all in the news that he finally understands that they need to be helping." Trump is not the type of person who will do something because he finally understands that he needs to be helping. It's not from the goodness of his heart. It's not based on morality. Something happened. Something happened that shifted his perspective on why Ukraine needs to be helped. And that's something definitely is beneficial for him. I also think that scandals with the Pentagon are really not helping because even his electorate base, which a lot of them are former veterans, are criticizing Pete Hegseth from top to bottom because he's just a terrible Secretary of Defense, to be honest. And obviously, Trump, for some reason, while wanting to associate with other unqualified people, really wouldn't want that to be like the major stain on his record. So it probably is a combination of factors, and whatever happened in that phone call on July 4th that Zelensky said, I think he finally understood, or this was really productive. Ever since then, the rhetoric really changed. And we're even seeing that, as I said, in public media, and we're seeing that coming out of Trump's mouth, not his cabinet, because his cabinet very often um, says things that are beneficial for Ukraine, but then Trump or someone else completely changes the course and direction, right? This time it's coming from the man himself. So for me personally, that is very interesting, and I'm going to be keeping a pulse on the story and on the development of it because I'm hesitant to believe that things are going to be changing rapidly. I'm hesitant to believe that things are going to be changing, period. I'm hesitant to believe that Trump is actually going to put his foot down and help Ukraine to the extent to which we need. But the defensive weapons, at least, Patriot missile systems, are necessary. And I really hope that those are going to make it here because, well, you know how I normally say that I disregard my own safety when it comes to drones because I live in a neighborhood in Kyiv where air defense systems usually take them down before I can actually get scared. I just hear explosions far away. That's not the case anymore. There were a couple of drones taken down very close to my building. My building was shaking, and at this point, drones feel about as scary as ballistic missiles do. My building shakes about as much as it does during ballistic missile airstrikes and during air ballistics and during cruise missiles. Honestly, I know so many types of weapons of mass destruction these days that no one should unless it's their professional knowledge and they work in that field. But all Ukrainians, you know, small or large, we all know different types of weapons of mass destruction. We know how to differentiate them by sound. We know how many we know the radius of their destruction, and we know how to hide from them and where to hide from them because that has been our life. So even if Trump only fulfills the air defense bit of the conversation, that'll still be incredibly helpful. And in the meanwhile, I will be following these developments to see where they go. For now, everything that I have said in terms of why the rhetoric changed is a speculation, so please take it with a large rock of salt. This is just my analysis based on what I see going on. Anyways, that's all I have for you for today. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, you enjoyed this bit of news. I certainly did, and it's nice to let yourself believe in something good for once, right? Yeah, so as per usual, please subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, send this video to a friend, give it a like, and tell me what you think. Do you think Trump is actually going to change course, or do we think these are just words? See you next time.